Okay, it looks like most of you are coming to the end of your initial annotating and getting to the end. There in that last, I see you marking up that last paragraph. Again, we're just going to focus on our, look at how Ralph Ellison has laid his essay out. This is basically what I see. Tell me if you see something different. But he begins with his introduction, sort of laying out that there's a question. There's sort of a dispute over how Charlie Parker got his nickname, Bird or Yardbird, right? And he begins with this strange sort of qualifier, oddly enough, which kind of suggests that there's some kind of dispute there going on. Listen to the introduction where he says, while several explanations are advanced as to how Charlie Parker Jr. became known as Bird, Yardbird as an earlier metamorphosis, none is conclusive. There is, however, overpowering eternal evidence that whatever the true circumstance of his ornithological designation, it had little to do with the chicken yard. Randy roosters and operatic hens are familiars to fans of the animated cartoons, right? You guys ever seen the Porky Pig cartoon with the crooning rooster, the Randy rooster, and he's up there and he's like super skinny. He's got a bow tie and he's singing and all the hens are like passing out, oh, and they're calling him Frankie, which is actually more of a reference to Frank Sinatra, I think. Have you ever seen that cartoon? Maybe we'll have to take a look at that in a minute. Okay, so he starts out, we're alluding to, I think it's important to note before we get to this biblical allusion and the symbolism here, and these analogies that he brings in from a bird watcher's field guide, he's talking about cartoons, right? What seems to be his thesis? He says it had little to do with a chicken yard, and despite the crabbed and constricted character of his lifestyle, Randy roosters and operatic hens are familiars to fans of the animated cartoons, but for all the pathetic comedy of his living, and despite the crabbed and constricted character of his lifestyle, Parker was a most inventive melodist, in birdwatchers' terminology, a true songster. So what seems to be his thesis statement here? What's he setting us up for to understand like his reason for writing in the first place? Okay, Leilani?
Maybe it could be like, despite his character, he was actually very virtuous in the music industry.
Very good. Okay, so despite the fact, what about his character?
Crabbed and constricted makes me think that he was, how do I put it?
Does it sound positive or negative?
It sounds very negative. It's
Good.
like he was stingy and didn't really get along with other people.
Good. Crabbed and constricted, okay? Stingy, maybe a little contentious. What about the pathetic comedy of his living? Did anybody else note that? Pathetic comedy. Seems to be sort of an oxymoron, doesn't it? So that pathetic comedy of his living is sort of the thesis is, to not just talk about how he got his name, but also to examine the duality or duplicity of this man, right? Okay? To examine the duplicity of Charlie Parker's character. Right? And so he begins, making the distinction that we are going to be looking at, you know, cartoon fans, you know, which is talking about our audience here, fans of, he directly assumes that some of his audience are fans of cartoons, right? And then he says ornithological designation, you know, cartoon fans versus bird watchers, I guess. And ornithological, he's already sort of bringing in some technical jargon here, right? So, cartoon fans versus ornithologists, right? That's quite a stretch, but also not. We're not talking about musicians here. Is this for just musicians and fans of music, musical fans? We haven't really even addressed them yet, right? Okay, so then in the second paragraph, the failure in the exposition of Bird's legend is intriguing, for nicknames are indicative of a change from a given to an achieved identity, whether by rise or fall, and they tell us something of the nicknamed individual's interaction with his fellows. In other words, nobody gives themselves a nickname unless you're Sting or something, you know, which kind of always struck me. I love the Police and Sting, Gordon Smith or whatever, but it's hard to imagine that at one point he looked at his friends and was like, hey guys, seriously, from now on, don't call me Gordon, call me Sting. You're like, okay, whatever, Sting. Right? What about Stang? How about Stung? You know, whatever. So usually somebody else gives you your handle or your nickname. Thus, since we suspect that for more of legend is involved in his renaming than Mr. Reasoner's title indicates, let us at least consult Roger Tory Peterson's Field Guide to the Birds for a hint as to why, during a period when most jazzmen were labeled cats, so we're bringing in that slang, someone hung the bird on Charlie, right? So cats, he's bird when everybody else is cool cats and hello kitten and stuff like that, and hung the bird is also him using slang from Ralph Ellison's time period. You'd be like, oh, he hung a whopper on you when he called you bird, right? Okay, so we're bringing in some informal language, right? It's not, but there's a definite counterpoint because we know that we're going to be using references to a field guide for ornithologists or bird watchers, right? Then this next paragraph, two species want our attention, the goldfinch versus the mockingbird. Okay, so the biblical allusion is the goldfinch. And what effect does that have? What was the goldfinch allusion about? What happened in the Bible, in Jesus?
Jesus was given a clay bird for a toy, and he brought it to life as the goldfinch.
Okay, Jesus brought an inanimate clay bird to life, and it was a piece of clay, and now it's a goldfinch, right? Okay, what might that be suggesting? Well, how can we tie that back to the speaker? What is the speaker and the speaker's purpose? Why connect bird to Jesus, who walks on water and turns clay into living things?
He's legendary.
legendary, right? Okay, the speaker reveres Berg, right? You know, when you, like, if somebody says, oh man, he's like, you know, if somebody comparing you to Jesus, is like showing a certain sort of sense of reverence, I would think. Okay, so the goldfinch, you know, the passion and the sacrifice, I think, is an important thing to notice here when he brings that in. Passion and sacrifice are also, remember, you know, Jesus is sacrificed for all of our sins, is how the Bible puts it, right? And so there's a certain, you know, connotation and I think tone that he's suggesting there, you know, even a symbolism that he's suggesting to us, the symbolism of the goldfish. We can't leave that stone unturned. Then he switches into the mockingbird, Mimus polyglottus. So this is paragraph 1. This is the first body paragraph. The first 2 paragraphs are really setting up his argument. Then this is body 1, body 2. We switch, we shift from the symbolism of the goldfinch to the mockingbird. The mockingbird, Mimus polyglottus, and we use, you know, some ornithological terms. Since we're shifting our focus here, I should shift my colors, shouldn't I? Mimus polyglottus, which means what in Latin? Mimus means to mimic, and polyglottus means many tones. So if you know what a mockingbird does, you know, even a mockingbird will imitate car alarms sometimes. And if one sets up outside your window, they usually get up early in the morning and stuff, and they'll be out there going through his entire repertoire, right? When you're trying to get those sacred last few minutes of sleep before the alarm clock goes off, right? Peterson informs us that the song consists of long successions of notes and phrases of great variety, with each phrase repeated a half dozen times before going on to the next. That mockingbirds are excellent mimics who adeptly imitate a score or more of species found in the neighborhood. That they frequently sing at night. A description not only comes from Parker's way with the saxophone, but even hints at a trait of his character. Okay, goldfinch to equals Jesus, and mockingbird, you know, mimics, you know, is nocturnal. His playing was characterized by velocity. Think about the Eddie Van Halen piece that we just heard when you read this. His playing was characterized by velocity, by long continued successions of notes and phrases, by swoops, bleats, echoes, rapidly repeated bebops, rebop bebops, by mocking mimicry of other jazzmen's style, and by interpolations or motifs with extraneous melodies, all of which added up to a dazzling display you can definitely get the author's tone here, right? There's that reverence, right? Dazzling display of wit, intelligence. It's smart, it's satirical. He's making fun of his competition in a satirical way by imitating them, but doing it in an exaggerated way to make fun of some of these other guys that are out there playing. Burlesque, it's sexy art, right? It's pathos. It's got emotion, right? So all of these things I think are important here to also offer up that sort of continued comparison with the mockingbird, you know, and to show the speaker's, you know, Ellison's attitude. But more importantly, I want to focus on this, you know, this interrupter here. Long velocity, long continued successions of notes and phrases by swoops, bleats, echoes, rapidly repeated bebops. I mean, bebops by mocking mimicry, right? So we've been talking a lot about looking at structure and arrangement from an arm's length. Introduction, body, shift to comparison, body to conclusion. But syntax is how the actual sentence is arranged. Why do you think he uses that interrupter in there? In that, you know, I mean, rebop, bebop. Bebop is what kind of language? What kind of language sort of mimics sound? Bebop. Tap, tap, tap. Pow, bang, shazam. Yeah, so he's got this like, you know, interrupter. He's got onomatopoeia. I have to say it like that so I can spell it right. So he's got slang mixed with technical jargon, you know, which is kind of an interesting thing here. We also get that we get this about our speaker. Our speaker is very well read and comprehensive. He's gone from talking about making allusions to cartoons, to the Bible, to a bird watcher's field guide, technical jargon, right? Okay. And all of this sort of adds up to what is his purpose? Talking about this duplicitous character, the duality of the man, right? And then in the end, we really get to his final point. Why does he, and this is not necessarily the end of the essay, but he brings in, he says he's probably more like a shrike. He's probably more like, he ends up on the Mockingbird because in the Mockingbird is not only a beautiful singer, but it's also a shrike, which is known to feed in what way?
Impaling insects.
Yeah. He comes swooping down, he grabs his prey, he keeps on his downward trajectory, and he smashes the insect into a thorn where it's impaled, and then he comes back and eats it. What is he suggesting about Charlie Parker there? Is that, we're not talking, what does that have anything to do with music at all? He's talking about something about his character. People who were named Charlie Parker, you know, what bird did they have in mind? They probably didn't put this much thought into it. But he could be dangerous, right? I mean, like a lot of geniuses and virtuosos, Charlie Parker, his life was kind of a mess, right? Drugs being, and his heroin addiction being sort of the final thing that ended his life. But he was a gambler. You know, he was notoriously like showing up late to his gigs, wearing somebody else's suit, and his horn not there in pawn. Oh, I need you to help me get my horn out of hock so I can have something to play tonight. You know, that's not how we want to remember him. We want to remember him for his genius, but the man was a man, and he was imperfect. Not only that, but like the mockingbird, why does he bring in this, a shrike, a species given to impaling insects and smaller songbirds on the points and thorns, and then they are destroyed. They are fond of fruit, especially mulberries, and if there is a tree in your yard, there will be, along with the wonderful music, much chalky blue tinted evidence of their presence. So not only does he make this beautiful music, but he's gonna poop all over everything. He's gonna leave a disgusting mess behind him, right? So this is complicated because we get that Ralph Ellison reveres Charlie Parker, but he ends up with this very unfortunate truth about the man, that he was so imperfect, that there was, you would be getting some blue chalky stuff on you if you hung out with him very long. But then these beautiful, tricksters, and they're not only great virtuosi, and I'm running out of room here, but they're great virtuosi, which is Latin for a virtuoso, versus con men and trickster. So there's this juxtaposition, this essay. If I was going to really focus on one particular structural technique that he uses, it's contrast. We recognize Charlie Parker's the myth that is by looking at the contrast of his what is the word that he uses here? The mystery, promise, and frustration of being human. Right? The impossible glory of being just flesh and blood in an imperfect animal who is also given to our sort of animalistic tendencies and things like that. I love this where, the utterly reverent and romantic, they are not beyond bugging human beings. Indeed, on summer nights in the South, when the moon hangs low, mockingbirds sing as though determined to heat every drop of romance in the sleeping adolescent's heart to fever pitch. Their song thrills and swings the entire moonstruck night to arouse one sense of the mystery, promise, and frustration of being human, alive and hot in the blood. They are as delightful to the eye as to the ear, but sometimes a similarity of voice and appearance makes for a confusion with the shrike, a species given to impaling insects, right? So there's that contradiction, the man versus the myth, which might be how you want to characterize it in your thesis sentence. So what I would like for you to do, you and for AP fans and fans of close analysis at home, is to come up with the thesis statement that best captures Ralph Ellison's purpose here. Okay? Why does he use this comparison of analogies about birds and comparison and allusions to cartoons in the Bible to make his point about Charlie Parker? Cartoon, Bible, ornithological field guide for bird watchers, and slang. Think about those stark contrasts that he uses there, right? Okay.